order for Tuesday, January 24th. We respectfully acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people. Before we adopt the agenda, we do have a couple of additions. Under 6, Education, we have a letter regarding Bill 28 update, and also you have a new item regarding the draft policy 3730, replacing the old one. Any other additions or changes to the agenda? Moved by Trustee Smith, seconded by Trustee DeGroot. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
You realize this isn't, you need to actually have the hands go up.
I saw the dead
Saw the
mark.
look, right?
Yeah. Trustee Dolman is joining us shortly, I believe, and Trustee Thorne is not going to be able to join us tonight. Minutes of November 22nd meeting.
So moved.
Smith, thank you. Trustee DeGroot, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Action list. Any comments or explanations on the action list? The reports for participation in case speakers that coming to the board,
Yes,
and also communication to technology
in progress.
in progress. Actually, it says done.
They were referred to the board from this committee, so this committee has completed their work with all of it. Now that's at the board table.
Anything else to add? Nothing? Okay, petitions and allegations, there are none. Education, Bill 28. The superintendent could explain that to us, that would be helpful.
Mr. Chair. As you know, we've talked before about Bill 28, a decision to the Supreme Court that came up in the fall. Allocation of $50 million was put out provincially. Our share of that ended up being $718,000 and change. As we reported earlier that sort of on estimates was sort of around 12 to 15 teachers, kind of depending on a variety of factors. Upon a closer calculation by Mr. Sandquist, sharpening his pencil, that has turned out to be closer to 18, 17.5, 17.7, something like that. So that became our target. As you know from our previous joint letter, put out between the Cowichan Valley Teachers Federation and myself, the fact we've had joint letters has been outstanding. Collective, collaborative approach to solving this and moving these resources into schools absolutely as quickly as possible. So in the previous letter outlined that we put out outlined the guiding principles that we would have in determining allocation. For example, it was not the intent of the district joint committee to spread it thinly across all schools, but to essentially pile it up into large enough pieces that something significant could be done with that, knowing that we only have less than half a year left to go by the time the staffing actually hits schools. So with that in mind, the CVTF went and ran some processes, looked at data, spoke with teachers. We at the district office did the same thing, looked at data that we had, spoke with our principals and vice principals, etc., looked at our priority schools, got together yesterday with the CVTF in our joint committee, and lo and behold, two lists were almost identical.
That's a true story.
It
That is Kristen Rossi, it was a true story.
Well, that is wonderful.
It's wonderful.
To,
It means we're kind of on the same page as we looked at needs in our schools and how we might support those. So the next task that happened yesterday was then to look at those priority areas and allocate the staffing that we had to schools, and that again became, once we had the priority schools, who gets how much. And you see that list in front of you. This letter went out to all staff this afternoon. And again, it went to everyone in the district because this has an impact on everyone in the district. It will be followed tomorrow by a letter to only the schools receiving an allocation, outlining process and timelines so that we can move this process along. And essentially, that process is you've just received 1.5 FTE for the remainder of the year. We would like to post that next Thursday. So we would like your allocation information of how you would like within your school to use that time by Wednesday next week. And we have a little form for them to fill in, signed jointly by the principal and the staff rep. And they would sit together, call a special staff meeting as we can under the collective agreement to have that conversation and jointly collectively determine the needs of how that might best be allocated within their school. Let us know the plan. We then post, and hopefully we have folks in place a week after that. Unbelievably collaborative process, and again, you can see the allocations there. And the only thing I would point out is that the couch and secondary allocation is clearly between two buildings. The need at Quam campus was noted.
So the district determined the distribution, but it's actually the school level that determines how that will impact the school.
That's the process we've decided on. Best determined locally within the school as to how they would split that time out and allocate that time within the school.
It's going to be interesting to see how that rolls out. Buchanan may have to do something totally different with that than Mohima or Alexandria.
I would hope they would. They will have different needs and different priorities, and they might look at how they support a particularly challenging class situation or a need across the school. All of our schools are very different one from another, and they will have different programs and processes in place and different solutions to how they allocate the money, or the FTE, which is why we left it in their hands. They are the ones best placed to make the decision.
Any questions of the superintendent? Thank you. Well done.
I would just end by saying, Mr. Chair, how excellent has been working with our CBTF on this process. It has been quick and collaborative and thoughtful, and always focused on the needs of kids.
Business and operations, Mr. Sandquist.
Thank you. We have included in the package a draft of the 2016-2017 amended annual budget. Over the winter break, the board received a revised funding announcement. We brought that to the board earlier this month. And we've been tracking as we've moved from our annual budget, which was set last May, to where we are today. The budget has gone through many, many changes in that time. We had increased enrollment, which has resulted in greater funding. We've had increased special needs designations, increased number of students in Aboriginal education receiving a program. Our funding has grown by about $2.9 million from our original projection as a result of those increased students. But along with those increased revenues, we've also had increased expenditures. So what we have in the package is a consolidated budget, which includes the special purpose funds and the capital funds. And what I want to walk you through is really the operating budget, because that's the real budget that's seen change. The special purpose funds have remained relatively stable, but as of the capital funds, but the operating budget has really gone through a lot of change. So it's up there, it's hard to see, so on your blotters we included an 11 by 17, knowing how it doesn't always show a lot of information in one page, hard to see. So the very first column that we have here shows you where the budget was, and you see a balanced budget at 1617 for the annual, and in the operating budget that was $72,384,502. Since that time, the board has brought in $261 for restricted surplus. So those were things at the end of the year that the board knew were going to need to be rolled over to this year, such as learning resource funds that weren't spent, 10% of the school budgets. If you hadn't met the Aboriginal education target, it got rolled over, various other commitments. So you'll see a matching revenue and a matching expenditure column for that. The next part is in funding enrollment growth, and I just talked about there being an additional $2.9 million in ministry grant. When we run through all these expenditures, you'll see a negative amount there on surplus appropriation of $179,000. So what this means is that the $800,000 of the prior year's surplus that the board was intending to use to balance this year is no longer fully required. It's now required to use $621,000 of the prior year's surplus, which returns that money back to the district's overall surplus. There's an in and out for for local education agreement contracts. There's no change to the overall budget for that, but that is an entry that has a net zero. It's just the number of students that have claimed on nominal roll that we will be billing back through the local education agreement. The board received a transportation fund, so that came in August, and through that transportation fund, in catchment and out of catchment ridership for fees were eliminated. So you'll see the funding coming in at $283,000, and the budget line item that we had was $320,000. So that comes out. So that was the previous budget line item, $320,000. There's a return of the administrative savings. We also learned after the budget was adopted last May that the ministry was going to return the administrative savings that were deducted from the operating grant. So we're reflecting those in the budget now. There's a few miscellaneous revenue adjustments, a few things in there, such as a small change to the ISP program and a small change to a couple other revenue items. So on this scale of $72,065,000 and sort of miscellaneous items that come in, things like asset sales or just little grants that come in throughout the year. The next item as we start to move into the expenditures that I wanted to bring to your attention is there's a busing contract that's currently under review. I will bring information to the board later on that, but I needed to adjust the amount to what I believe that is going to have the budget accurately reflect the expenditure that I believe will be needed to be adjusted. There was an addition of a homestay manager, so that position was added as the international student program grew beyond capacity of a single individual to manage that portfolio. Between the summer programs and the regular programs, there's approximately 550 homestays now to manage in a year. So that was a lot for one person. Approximately 550. The summer program may have 300 people, students come through. We also, with the additional students that received designations, there's certainly an increase in the number of education assistants in this budget, along with an increase in the number of teachers to support all that new enrollment growth. There were adjustments made to exempt and principal vice principal compensation after a 7-year freeze. And there were some other miscellaneous staffing adjustments that amounted to $22,000 with all the ins and outs. As we look at the miscellaneous services and supply adjustments, a big part of this is parking some money in the Aboriginal education target, which hasn't yet been allocated, and we put it into supplies not knowing how they were going to expend it. So as the enrollment went up, so did the grant, and it's targeted, so it must be spent on Aboriginal education, and the allocation hasn't been determined. An item that I've put here and certainly for discussion, when we balanced the budget in the spring, the board removed the payment for the unfunded future liability, for the unfunded employee future benefit liability. The board had been putting aside $50,000 a year, working towards the retirement of that. To return $50,000 would put the board on a 4-year repayment plan. There'd be 3 years remaining to fully extinguish that. So that wasn't something that had been considered or discussed previously, but we have included it in this draft, so it's up for discussion, but we believe that that would be a good use of those funds to try to eliminate that debt. And the final piece is occasionally an item is purchased from the operating budget that is capital in nature. So an example might be a mower for the operations department, which costs more than $5,000, but they're going to use a ground supply budget to buy it. So occasionally we move money from the operating to the capital budget, and that's what that small amount is there, $22,000. So down below, there's a surplus reconciliation here, and that shows that on the financial statements at the end of June last year, there was $2,248,646 in surplus. And what's being utilized in this budget is $1,254,250. That leaves unallocated or surplus remaining of $994,396. So that's down a little bit from some of the other times we've been walking through this. I think the last time it was about $1,060,000 roughly. But we've made an adjustment on the busing contract. That is really why that's changed, why that shifted from the last time we brought this to the board. So I wonder if there's any questions on any of these items. It's sort of a quick summary, high-level walkthrough from the starting point to today's point.
I have two questions. Why do we use the word at the bottom here, opening surplus, when you're actually referring to the end? It's not the beginning of 2015, it's the end. It's a surplus remaining in that financial year. What?
I was thinking of it as the opening surplus in the 16-17 year brought forward from the 15-16 year.
Just long as I understand. Second question is, was it last year or the year before we talked about putting a contingency in? Is there no contingencies in here and it's all allocated in the surplus, or?
Correct. The contingency was all in the unallocated surplus.
Any other questions? Trustee Stoll.
Just the $50,000 to the paying back for
Unfunded employee
facility
future
use.
benefits.
Thank you. So if we pass or recommend the board to pass this budget, that piece will be included. Is that
Correct.
nice?
It has been included in the draft that's in the package.
Oh,
So we did build it into the budget total, the consolidated budget, and I think when the board took it out or removed it in the process, it was sort of under the assumption or under the intent that if there were funds available, it would be reinstated, and that's why we put it back here.
Sorry. Proceed.
one other question, and that is around the new staff for Bill 28. We are anticipating receiving $718,000 change. That is not featured anywhere, correct?
Correct. The announcement arrived after the ministry asked for the amended budget, and they specifically in their instructions asked us to leave it out, not to include it. Although it will be shown in the special purpose funds, and so when you receive the financial statements at the end of this year, you will see those funds, but not in the budget.
So we won't be amending the budget again to?
No.
That's interesting. Trustee Smith.
We all say the remote.
I just like to move that we recommend to the board that we accept the 2016-17 amended annual budget.
$35,781,465.
What did you say? 25,000?
Yeah, we're gonna do it on that.
Seconded by Trustee Gilman. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed?
Thank you, Jason.
I just have one more question. The 320 under transportation fund, that's the deficit. Is that the loss of revenue?
Yeah.
So do we make a point of making the minister aware that we're losing out on this?
They were funding only the encatchment. So that piece that's there, the $36,000 was the out encatchment and choice.
Which is something we have to discuss in the transportation.
Correct.
Okay, moving on to policy.
Thank you. You have before you, in your package and on your blotter as well, a revised draft. As you know, with revised curriculum that's in place, kindergarten to grade 9 right now, and the coming of 10 to 12, it's impacted a number of areas. One of those key areas is how we report out, how we talk about students' progress, how we let parents know, and of course how we let students know how they're doing. And with the increasing flexibility of the new curriculum, the ministry has shifted its provincial policy as to what they're requiring of districts. And one of the things they've asked this year is for districts to implement their own policy that reflects the provincial directions, so that everything's lined up and coherent. So essentially that's what you see before you in terms of this draft policy, is the need for flexibility. The ministry has offered, and I'll be looking over at Assistant Superintendent Coors, who is the local guru on this. In the provincial policy, they are now allowing a sort of a Form A and a Form B. One is kind of a traditional approach, and one is a more flexible, often electronically based, but not exclusively, ongoing approach to communicating student learning. One has the traditional 3 report cards a year, as we've always seen. The other is more, again, ongoing, flexible, so that we can keep parents far more updated on how their children are doing, not just with a few benchmarks. So what is happening around the... Should I pause there for questions?
My question is this replacing something, or we had no policy on communicating with students before?
We did not.
You had an assessment.
Many districts didn't have a reporting policy because they just followed the provincial, whatever the ministry said, that's what the districts did. Now the ministry is asking us to have a policy.
Yes.
It feels vague and intentionally so. So is this a document that really just puts us in alignment with the ministry?
It does. What the ministry reporting order now says is there's an option A and an option B. Option A is one is very traditional, one is a little bit more fluid. And they also want boards to consider in their policy whether letter grades may or may not be assigned. Kindergarten to grade 7.
I guess, sorry, it probably seems obvious to you, but it just seems to me this doesn't really do much for us as a school district. I mean, and I know it's policy, so it has to be broad, but it's really just saying that we're giving ourselves lots of wiggle room to proceed as you feel best and as is compliant with the ministry. Okay.
We're going to a brave new world. We're quite not sure we're
What our draft policy is saying is we will stay aligned with ministry regulation and requirements. That will, because we can't not be. That sort of has to be there. And the approach we took was mirroring the provincial approach, which is continuing to allow flexibility and choice in two areas. And so we also wanted to have a policy that doesn't need to be changed every year, or we just say we will. This is an area that always has regulation by ministry. We will always adhere to that regulation. And right now, the ministry is offering flexibility, and our policy mirrors that flexibility. What's not here are any regulations or current procedures, which I have many of, which is what's happening, which is sort of separate from the policy. The policy is an enabling one. It says we will stay compliant, we will follow the law, we'll follow the rules, and allow for flexibility as new practices emerge. The ongoing procedures is sort of what's happening now, Form A, Form B, you've had that conversation with you. So yeah, I wouldn't say this is vague, but it is attempting to be enabling. Now, it wasn't intended to be vague, let me put it that way, but intended to be enabling and aligning with the ministry regulation.
Trustee Smith.
First of all, love the new format. First time we've seen one in the new format. Well done. I'm almost thinking it's too wordy. Because if parents are going to be reading this, they're going to go, I'm almost thinking that it could be condensed even further. Because you've already got the references, the province, yada yada yada. So I'm almost wondering if, like even the second and third paragraph, in the very top here, Board of Education believes the quality of communication of students, blah 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 blah. Like I'm wondering if those two could be combined and shortened. Like I'm almost thinking this could be almost confusing to them because it is so incredibly big.
Enabling.
Enabling.
That it's now too wordy for it being so vague. The references are right there on where to go. So I'm wondering if it could maybe be condensed a little bit. But I really like the new format. It's clean and it's something. Well done, you guys.
Trustee Spilka.
I'm all for flexibility. What I'm wondering is the decision on which kind of reporting, whether there's letter grades, what will be part of the final reports, etc. Is that teacher by teacher? Is that school by school? Is that district decision making?
Essentially, it's a combination of all of the above. But we
And
have
flexible.
we have
Not me.
well. Maybe Cheryl, you want to talk about sort of the reporting group that you have that's looking into this and sort of leading the way on our practice.
Yeah, so essentially what the ministry reporting guidelines has said, especially around the grades, is that we no longer, K to 9, not just 7, but K to 9, need to put grades on report cards because we recognize that grades are not always the best way to communicate learning and often get in the way of communicating good learning. However, if a parent requests letter grades, then they will receive them. So that's just a teeny piece that sort of is a part of this complex movement as we're going forward. We've had a group of teachers for the last 4 years who have been working on building guiding parameters, principles around when we assess, when we communicate to parents, what does that look like, what does that sound like. So we've been moving towards e-portfolios as well as paper portfolios because we recognize that we have clientele that may not necessarily have access to the technology side of things. And so right now in our district, we have a group of teachers who are still using the traditional, so they have 2 options. So we have a group of teachers that are still using Form A, which is the traditional. At the end of each term, you do Form A and add letter grades because you're following the old ministerial, because we have option A, which is the new interim, or option B, which is the old reporting order, which means you do give letter grades. So we do have a group of teachers who are using report card A and who are doing it each of the 3 terms and are giving letter grades. We also have a group of teachers who are doing report card Form B. They are a group of teachers that are either communicating through e-portfolios or paper portfolios and are communicating on an ongoing basis. And with option B, with the ministry, you're looking at 2 learning summaries. And so teachers have the ability to do a learning summary by the end of March and then a final learning summary by the end of June. And those are all following the ministerial regulations. We're very clear on you have to still report on your learning summary at the end of the year, still needs to report on reading, writing, numeracy, science, socials, applied design skills, technology, and a self-assessment on core competencies. So that all still will happen. So that's happening. And our intermediate teachers who are doing Form B, many of them are opting to not use letter grades, but we've been very, very careful, and they've been very, very careful about communicating that to their parents about what does not having a letter grade look like and sound like. One teacher, in fact, did a debate with his class, letter grades versus no letter grades, which way to go, kind of a thing. So the teachers themselves are philosophically choosing whether letter grades or no letter grades is right for them, because they have to believe in it, and they have to, and their assessment practices then need to change. So we're really making our movement, and which is what I love about what the ministry is doing, which I get that it's a bit vague, but we really have to go with our teachers. Enabling, sorry. But we really have to go with our teachers and where they're at and really support them. And as they move forward with the redesigned curriculum and are getting more comfortable with what they're doing, they start bumping up to the assessment piece, you know, where it's not working, and they come to sort of, yeah, it isn't working. I do need to assess my kids differently. I do need to be, you know, co-creating and doing this together with them. And letter grades aren't quite working for us anymore in that case. But it's gotta come from the teachers. And the last meeting that we had with a very large group of teachers, 2 from each of our schools, in fact, one of the main comments that they were saying was thank you. Thank you for allowing us the flexibility. Thank you for not mandating, thou must do. Thank you for giving us the time. They were also very easily able to articulate the benefits to both their students, the parents, and themselves in terms of moving to this more ongoing, fluid way of assessing. So we're in transition, so it's difficult to write policy for transition. And I think what also one of the reasons why it seems vague is there is no procedures, because the procedure part falls under the hands of the superintendent, right? So this is just kind of the big picture enabling piece, and then the other.
Thank you, Ms. Cruz. That explains why this has to be enabling, but at the end of the day, the permanent record card,
That's a different story.
it will be
Letter grades.
standardized across. So
That-
when a child moves from one school to another, that permanent record card will be a standardization.
That piece has not changed. The
The regulation has not changed
Yeah.
potentially.
and teachers are very aware of that.
Trustee Crown?
I certainly agree with everything that you've said, that it has to be an enabling document. However, I also feel that the document has to be relatively usable. This is a public document. It should be something that most of our parents can pick up and get. And right now, I feel that it is so enabling that it is actually difficult to understand what our intent is. And I would also like to go back to something that we actually heard from Trustee DeGroot, and that is that our public document should be written to an everybody kind of level. And this is discombobulating. I'm sorry.
Find it.
I support the intent, but I can't support the verbiage. Maybe verbiage was a bad word, I'm sorry. The actual words.
Trustee DeGroot.
This is board policy, so this is for us. The actual explaining of this probably wouldn't have, people aren't likely to go to our board policy to see what it is. They'd be going into the school, I'm sorry, this is one time, but the language can be at this, because it's for us. If this was a document that we were putting out for parents to read, I would be joining in that. The language needs to be adjusted. But I think it's just, the language is, it's because it is adopted our policy for us to know what's going on.
Trustee Smith?
Through the chair to the assistant superintendent, would you mind if I send you a couple of thoughts on this?
My next question is, policy is adopted by sending it out to, do we send this to the advisory committee before it goes to the board, or?
No, we may choose to do that.
It's an option.
It may go directly to the board from here, it may go through advisory, it may go through some other process, it may asked to be recycled back through here again. You have all the choices.
So we've had some interesting language debating this, so what is your wish? Do we send this on to the board as written, or ask for it to be referred back to staff?
Can I just ask, are the staff involved recommending this, or are you looking for direction on how we proceed?
We are recommending it.
Recommending the language that's here?
But happy to take, that's why this is to take your feedback. Yeah, we wrote it. It made sense to us. But that's why we have you to give us some advice.
Trustee Smith.
I wouldn't mind, just from doing some policy writing in the past, if I could send some possible changes to make it a little bit clearer for parents, but also keep it at the level of the board to the assistant superintendent, if that's at all possible. Please and thank you.
Motion to that effect?
A motion to refer policy back to senior staff for
With
a
advice-
review and
with advice from trustees that are interested.
certainly.
Any discussion on it? Yes.
Could I ask just a question for clarification?
No.
Because I like the enablingness of that motion.
Could be.
I just sort of want to check that the sort of intent is okay, but it's the
The
how
wording.
it's said, the wording, is it clear enough? Thank you.
So that was my question, is that are we okay that we would have, how many elementary schools we have, 13? We may have 13 different reporting, 13 different report cards?
No, two. So our current practice is that we have, like the ministry, a Form A and a Form B. We've reversed ours. And actually, we were there first before the ministry began. One of them is in line with option A from the ministry, and one is in line with option B. Teachers can choose to do one of two things. Usually a portfolio-based assessment that's ongoing and open, usually supported by technology, but not necessarily, or a traditional report card, as we have always known and loved.
But in a single school,
You could have
A,
different teachers could be doing either of those. Those are through conversations with parents, as a staff, with principals. Again, as we're in this interim phase where mandating someone to do something they're not comfortable with yet is not helpful, which is exactly why the ministry has not mandated anything. They are leaving it open because we want those who are competent and comfortable and willing to move down that more flexible road to do so, and yet not requiring others that aren't ready yet to do that.
ready for the call, question? So we're asking for this well-written professional document to be wordsmithed. Okay. All those in favor? Opposed?
I'm sure the motion said that.
That was less than 8 one.
Okay, any other business?